The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above. Maria Rodriguez, as she wiped down the counter at Manny's Corner Market for what felt like the 100th time that evening. The digital clock on the register glowed 11:43 p.m. in harsh red. Numbers, each minute crawling by like an eternity. Outside, the small Ohio town of Millbrook had settled into its usual sleepy rhythm. Porch lights casting golden pools on empty sidewalks. The occasional car drifting past with headlights cutting through the October darkness. Maria's back ached from the long shift, but she couldn't complain. This job at Manny's was everything to her and Emma. Health insurance, steady pay, and most importantly, understanding from old Manny Kowalski, who let her bring 3-year-old Emma to work during her night shifts. The arrangement wasn't ideal, but with no family nearby and childcare costs that would eat up most of her paycheck, it was their lifeline. In the cramped back office, Emma slept peacefully on a makeshift bed of couch cushions, surrounded by her treasures. A worn copy of Goodnight Moon, a box of broken crayons, and most importantly, her beloved stuffed elephant named Peanuts. The little girl's dark curls fell across her cherub face as she dreamed, one small hand clutching Peanut's gray trunk. Maria had checked on her daughter just minutes ago, tucking the pink blanket more securely around Emma's shoulders and kissing her forehead softly. The store's ancient heater wheezed to life, sending warm air through the vents and causing the promotional banners to flutter slightly. Maria counted the day's earnings methodically, her fingers moving through the worn bills with practiced efficiency. Tuesday nights were usually quiet in Millbrook, a few customers grabbing last-minute milk or cigarettes, maybe a trucker stopping for coffee and directions to the interstate. The routine was comforting in its predictability. That's when everything changed. The brass bell above the door chimed its cheerful welcome, jarring Maria from her counting. She looked up, expecting to see Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who sometimes stopped by for her late-night ice cream fix. Instead, a tall figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the darkness like something from our worst nightmares. The man stepped into the harsh fluorescent light, and Maria's breath caught in her throat. He was easily 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that strained against a black hoodie pulled up over his head, casting deep shadows across his face. What she could see of his features was sharp and angular. A stubbled jaw clenched tight, pale. Lips pressed into a thin line, and eyes that seemed to look right through her. But it was his left forearm that made her blood run cold. There, emerging from the sleeve of his hoodie, was the most intimidating tattoo she'd ever seen. A cobra, expertly inked in vivid detail, coiled around his arm from wrist to elbow. The serpent scales seemed to shimmer under the store lights, each one meticulously shaded in deep greens and blacks. But it was the snake's head that truly terrified her, positioned just below his elbow, mouth open wide to reveal fangs dripping with venom and eyes like twin emeralds that seemed to stare directly at her with malevolent intelligence. The man's boots, heavy black combat style, thudded against the worn linoleum as he approached the counter. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last in the suddenly suffocating silence of the store. Maria's hands trembled as she tried to discreetly reach for the panic button Manny had installed beneath the register, but the man's voice stopped her cold. Don't. The single word carried the weight of absolute authority, spoken in a gravelly tone that suggested he was used to being obeyed without question. Keep your hands where I can see them. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs as she slowly placed her palms flat on the counter. The man stepped closer, and she caught a whiff of cheap cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something else. Sweat and nervous energy that made her stomach churn. Open the register. Now. His demand was quiet, but loaded with menace. Maria noticed his left hand twitching slightly, fingers opening and closing in a rhythmic pattern that spoke of barely contained tension. When she didn't move fast enough, he leaned forward, bringing that cobra tattoo closer to her face. I said no. Behind the partially open office door, Emma stirred in her nest of cushions. The raised voices had penetrated her dreams of dancing. Elephants and ice cream castles, pulling her back to the waking world. She blinked her large brown eyes, still heavy with sleep, and sat up slowly, peanuts clutched protectively to her chest. Through the crack in the door, Emma could see Mama standing very still behind the counter, her face pale as moonlight. A tall man with his back to Emma was saying mean words in a scary voice that made her tummy feel funny. Emma had never seen Mama look so frightened before, not even during the big thunderstorms that sometimes kept them both awake. The register drawer flew open with a sharp ding, and the man began stuffing crumpled bills into his jacket pockets with greedy efficiency. Maria watched helplessly as he took everything, the day's earnings, the emergency 20s Manny kept hidden beneath the coin tray, even the handful of ones she'd been saving for Emma's Halloween costume. Please, Maria whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming lights. I have a little girl. This is all we have. For a moment, the man's movements paused, and something flickered across his face. Was it regret? Humanity? But then that nervous giggle escaped his lips, a sound so incongruous and chilling that it made Maria's skin crawl. It wasn't the laugh of someone enjoying a joke. It was the sound of frayed nerves and barely contained panic. Emma pressed her small face closer to the door crack, her 3-year-old mind struggling to understand why the man with the pretty snake was making Mama cry. She watched as he turned slightly, giving her a clearer view of that mesmerizing cobra tattoo that seemed to move in the shifting light. The snake's emerald eyes caught the fluorescent glow, appearing to wink at her with secret knowledge. The robbery lasted less than 3 minutes, but to Maria, it felt like hours. When the man finally backed toward the door, clutching $340 in stolen cash, he paused for one last look around the store. That giggle bubbled up again, nervous and wrong, as his eyes swept the aisles one final time. Then he was gone, disappearing into the night as suddenly as he had appeared, leaving behind only the lingering scent of cheap cologne and the memory of those emerald cobra eyes. The bell chimed once more, but now its cheerful sound seemed mocking in the aftermath of terror. Maria collapsed against the counter, her legs finally giving out as the adrenaline faded. In the office, Emma hugged Peanuts tighter and wondered why Mama was making those choking sounds, and why the nice snake man had made her feel so scared. Detective Sarah Chun's radio crackled to life at 5:47 a.m., jolting her from the restless sleep that had become her norm since joining Millbrook's police force 6 months ago. Unit 23, we have a 211 at Manny's Corner Market on Oak Street. Respond. Immediately. She rolled out of bed, already reaching for her uniform, while beside her kennel, Rex lifted his magnificent head with alert intelligence. Rex wasn't just any German shepherd. He was a 4-year-old purebred with an impressive lineage of police and military working dogs. His coat was a rich blend of black and tan, with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to understand human emotions better than most humans did. At 85 pounds of pure muscle and loyalty, Rex had been Sean's partner for 2 years, and their bond was unbreakable. They'd worked together in Chicago before transferring to this quiet Ohio town, seeking a slower pace after a shooting incident that had shaken them both. As Chun's patrol car pulled up to Manny's Corner Market, the first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft pastels that seemed mockingly peaceful after the night's violence. The store's neon open 24 hours sign flickered erratically, casting intermittent red shadows across the empty parking lot. Crime scene tape already cordoned off the area, and Officer Martinez waved her over with a grim expression. What do we have? Chun asked, releasing Rex from the back of her cruiser. The German shepherd immediately began his assessment, nose to the ground, reading the story that scent could tell. Single perpetrator, armed robbery, Martinez reported, consulting his notebook. Happened around 11:47 p.m. Store clerk Maria Rodriguez and her 3-year-old daughter were present. No injuries, but the kid's pretty shaken up. The real kicker? Our security system chose last night to malfunction. No video footage at all. Chun surveyed the scene, her trained eyes taking in details. The register stood open like a mouth, frozen in a scream, and she could see the slight disarray where desperate hands had grabbed at bills. A child's coloring book lay abandoned near. The counter, crayons scattered like confetti across the linoleum floor. The normalcy of the scene made the violence feel even more invasive. Rex worked methodically around the perimeter, his sensitive nose cataloging every scent. Chun watched him pause near the door, head tilting as he processed information invisible to human senses. His tail gave a slight wag, not playful, but the focused acknowledgement of a working dog who'd found something interesting. Chun made a mental note of the spot for later examination. "Where are the victims?" Chun asked, following the sound of muffled voices toward the back of the store. In the cramped office behind the main counter, she found a scene that broke her heart. Maria Rodriguez sat hunched in a folding chair, her arms wrapped protectively around a small girl who seemed determined to disappear into her mother's embrace. The child's dark curls were matted with sleep and tears, and she clutched a gray stuffed elephant like a lifeline. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" "I'm Detective Chun," she said softly, keeping her voice gentle and non-threatening. "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened." Maria looked up with red-rimmed eyes that spoke of a sleepless night filled with fear and helpless anger. "I already told the other officer everything." The man was tall, maybe 6 feet, wearing a black hoodie. He had this tattoo, a snake on his arm. He took all the money and left. Her voice cracked slightly. Emma saw it all. "She hasn't spoken since." Chun's gaze shifted to the little girl, whose large brown eyes peeked out from behind her mother's shoulder like a frightened fawn. Emma's silence wasn't unusual. Childhood trauma often manifested this way, she knew from her training in victim services. But something about this child's alertness, the way her eyes tracked movement and seemed to catalog everything around her, suggested that Emma had seen more than anyone realized. "Emma?" Chun tried, crouching down to the child's eye level. "My name is Sarah. I'm here to help catch the bad man who scared you and your mommy." Emma's response was to bury her face deeper into Maria's shoulder, one small hand gripping her elephant tighter. Chun could hear Rex's paws clicking against the linoleum as he finished his initial sweep of the store, and an idea began to form. "Would you like to meet my partner?" Chun asked Emma, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used with all frightened witnesses. "His name is Rex, and he's really good at finding bad guys. But he's also really good at being gentle with people who've been scared." Emma's head turned slightly, curiosity winning a small battle against fear. Chun stepped back and gave a soft whistle. Rex appeared in the doorway, reading the situation immediately with the intuition that made him such an exceptional police dog. He didn't bound in with typical canine enthusiasm. Instead, he approached slowly, his body language calm and non-threatening. The transformation was immediate and remarkable. Emma's grip on her mother loosened slightly, and she tilted her head to study this magnificent creature who radiated safety and strength. Rex seemed to sense her fragile emotional state and lowered himself to the ground about 3 feet away, resting his head on his paws in a completely non-aggressive posture. "He's beautiful," Maria whispered, the first hint of wonder replacing the fear in her voice. "Emma loves animals. She's always asking me if we can get a dog." Emma slid down. from her mother's lap with the cautious movements of a child testing unknown waters. She took one tentative step toward Rex, then another. The German shepherd remained perfectly still, allowing her to approach at her own pace. His tail gave the slightest wag, just enough to show friendliness without seeming threatening. When Emma's small hand finally made contact with Rex's soft fur, something magical happened. The tension that had gripped her tiny body since the robbery began to melt away. She ran her fingers through his thick coat, marveling at its softness, and for the first time in hours, a tiny smile ghosted across her lips. "Nice doggy," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible but music to her mother's ears. Rex's tail wagged slightly more enthusiastically, and he lifted his head to look at her with those intelligent brown eyes that seemed to say, "I understand, little one. You're safe now." Chun felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with breakthrough moments in difficult cases. She'd seen Rex work magic with traumatized witnesses before, but never with someone so young. The bond forming between the frightened child and her canine partner might just be the key to solving this case. "Rex likes you," Chun told Emma softly, "and I think he wants to help catch the man who scared you. Would you like that?" Emma nodded solemnly, never taking her eyes off Rex. In that moment, Detective Chun knew they'd found their path forward. Not through traditional interrogation techniques or standard police procedures, but through the healing power of an unlikely friendship between a traumatized 3-year-old and a police dog who understood that sometimes the most important part of the job was simply being present for those who needed comfort most. The Rodriguez apartment was a cozy 2-bedroom unit on the second floor of an aging brick building, where the scent of Maria's homemade empanadas usually filled the air. But 3 days after the robbery, the atmosphere felt heavy and subdued. Emma had retreated into a shell of silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary, and flinching at unexpected sounds, the neighbor's television, a car door slamming, even the familiar creak of their old refrigerator. Detective Chun arrived at 2:30 p.m. on Thursday, Rex trotting beside her with his service vest gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. She'd made this her routine, daily visits during Emma's waking hours, always bringing Rex, always patient. Today, she carried a small bag of dog treats and a children's book about police dogs that she'd picked up from the library. "Any changes?" Chun asked Maria quietly as they settled in the living room. The space was cramped but welcoming, with Emma's artwork taped to the walls and her toys scattered across a worn but clean carpet. Afternoon light streamed through thin curtains, casting gentle patterns across the room. Maria shook her head, worry etched in the lines around her eyes. "She woke up screaming again last night, 3rd time this week. And she won't eat much, just picks at her food. I'm getting scared, Detective Chun. What if she never gets better?" Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, building elaborate towers with her alphabet blocks, while stealing glances at Rex. The German shepherd had learned to position himself about 4 feet away from her, close enough to be comforting, but far enough to let her control their interactions. His patience was remarkable. He could lie motionless for an hour, watching her play, responding only when she showed interest in approaching him. "Emma," Chun said softly, settling onto the carpet beside her. "I brought Rex a special treat today. Would you like to give it to him?" Emma's dark eyes flickered with interest as Chun held out a dog biscuit shaped like a bone. The little girl took it carefully, as if it were made of precious glass, and approached Rex with the slow, deliberate movements that had become her new normal since the robbery. Rex accepted the treat with gentle dignity, his tail wagging just enough to show appreciation. As Emma settled beside him, running her small fingers through his thick fur, something remarkable happened. For the first time since that terrible night, she began to speak, not to the adults in the room, but to Rex. "You're a good boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "You have pretty fur. It's soft like peanuts, but bigger." Rex's ears twitched attentively, and he shifted slightly to give her better access to pet him. Chun exchanged a meaningful glance with Maria, who had tears gathering in her eyes. This was the most Emma had spoken since the robbery, and she was choosing to share it with Rex. Chun pulled out her small recorder, keeping it discreetly hidden as she documented this breakthrough moment. Over the next 20 minutes, Emma's conversation with Rex grew more animated. She told him about her favorite cartoons, about how Mama made the best pancakes in the world, and about her stuffed elephant Peanuts, who is very brave, but sometimes scared of loud noises. Rex listened with the focused attention that only the best therapy animals possessed, occasionally offering a soft huff or a gentle tail wag in response. Then, as naturally as breathing, Emma's topics shifted to that night. "Rex," she said, combing her fingers through his fur in a soothing rhythm, "there was a scary man at Mama's work. He made her cry." Rex's brown eyes fixed on her face with remarkable intensity, as if he understood the importance of what she was sharing. Chun held her breath, afraid to move and break the spell of this moment. Emma continued petting Rex, her voice taking on the matter-of-fact tone that children often used when discussing traumatic events. "The man had a snake, Rex, not a real snake like at the zoo, but a picture snake on his arm. It was green and had mean eyes, just like the cobra in my animal book." Emma reached for one of her picture books and flipped to a page showing various snakes. She pointed to the cobra illustration. "Like this one, but prettier, shinier." Rex remained perfectly still as Emma traced patterns on his fur, mimicking the coils of the tattoo she'd witnessed. The snake went round and round his arm, from here to here, she demonstrated on Rex's leg, and its head was right ... here. She touched a spot that Chun quickly noted corresponded to where a person's elbow would be. "Was the man tall, Emma?" Chun asked very gently, not wanting to interrupt the flow, but needing to gather information. Emma looked at Chun briefly then. Back at Rex. "Tell her, Rex," she said seriously. "Tell her the man was bigger than the candy shelf, but not as big as the milk cooler. I could see the top of his head from my hiding spot." Chun's mind raced, calculating heights. The candy display at Manny's was about 5 feet tall, the milk cooler nearly 7 feet. That put their suspect somewhere between 5'10" and 6'2", consistent with Maria's estimate. "What else can you tell Rex about the scary man?" Chun prompted, using Emma's preferred method of communication. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper as she buried her face in Rex's neck. "He made a funny sound, Rex. Not a happy laugh, but a nervous one. Like when I laugh when I'm in trouble, but it's not really funny." She attempted to recreate the sound, a high-pitched staccato giggle that made Chun's skin crawl. It was exactly the kind of nervous tell that experienced criminals sometimes developed under stress. "And he smelled funny too," Emma continued, wrinkling her nose at the memory. "Like Daddy's old cologne that made me sneeze, but worse. And something else ... something sharp that hurt my nose." Chun made careful notes. "Cheap cologne and possibly cigarettes or alcohol, details that could help identify their suspect if they found him." Rex seemed to sense that Emma was becoming tired from reliving the traumatic experience. He shifted slightly, encouraging her to lean against his solid warmth. Emma accepted the comfort, resting her small body against his side with a sigh. "Rex is very smart," Emma announced to the room. "He listens better than grown-ups. He doesn't ask scary questions or make me feel bad for hiding. He just listens." Maria wiped away tears, overwhelmed by her daughter's resilience and the gentle patience of this remarkable dog. Chun felt a familiar surge of admiration for her partner. Rex had accomplished in 4 days what traditional interview techniques might never have achieved. As their visit wound down, Emma made Rex a promise that chilled everyone in the room with its innocent determination. "Don't worry, Rex," she said, hugging him tightly. "If I see the Snake Man again, I'll tell you right away. And then you can catch him and make sure he never scares any more mommies. Okay?" Rex's gentle huff seemed to say he understood completely, and that he would do everything in his power to keep that promise. 2 weeks after the robbery, Detective Chun's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Martinez burst into the station at 7:23 a.m., clutching a manila folder with barely contained excitement. "Chun, you need to see this," he called. Across the bullpen, where she sat reviewing case files, with Rex lying patiently at her feet. "What have you got?" Chun asked, looking up from the witness statements she'd been cross-referencing for the dozenth time. "Remember that B&E on Maple Street last month? The one where the perp cut himself climbing through a window?" Martinez slapped the folder on her desk with triumph. Blood evidence came back with a DNA match in the system. Danny Walsh, 34, multiple priors for armed robbery and assault. And get this, he's got a cobra tattoo on his left forearm. Chun's pulse quickened as she studied Walsh's mugshot. The man staring back at her had the angular features Maria had described. Sharp jawline, pale complexion, cold eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. But it was the booking photo, showing his left arm, that made her breath catch. There, in vivid detail, was the cobra tattoo exactly as Emma had described it to Rex. Emerald green scales, fangs bared in eternal menace, coiled from wrist to elbow. "Where is he now?" Chun asked, already reaching for her jacket. "That's the beautiful part," Martinez grinned. "He's been staying at the Sunset Motel on Route 9, paying weekly in cash. Manager says he's been acting paranoid, jumping at every siren. Patrol units are already en route." The arrest went smoothly. Too smoothly, Chun thought as she watched Walsh submit to handcuffs without resistance. He was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 5'11" in boots, with the pallid complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors. Up close, the cobra tattoo was even more striking than in the photos, its scales seeming to ripple as the muscles in his arm tensed. What struck her most was his nervous energy. Even in custody, Walsh couldn't seem to stay still, fingers tapping against his leg, foot bouncing, and most tellingly, that odd giggle Emma had described. It bubbled up at inappropriate moments, a high-pitched sound that seemed disconnected from any genuine emotion. "Danny Walsh," Chun said as they processed him at the station. "You're under arrest for the armed robbery of Manny's Corner Market on October 15th. "Don't know what you're talking about," Walsh replied, but that nervous giggle betrayed him immediately. "I was home that night. Ask my girlfriend." "We will," Chun assured him. "But first, we'd like you to participate in a lineup. You have the right to have your attorney present." The real challenge began the next morning when Chun attempted to arrange the identification process with Emma. The traditional lineup was impossible. No 3-year-old could be expected to stand behind one-way glass and point out her attacker among 6 similar-looking men. Instead, Chun decided to try a photo array, but even that proved problematic. At the Rodriguez apartment, Emma sat beside Rex on the living room floor, surrounded by her coloring books and toys. When Chun spread 6 photographs on the coffee table, all men with similar builds and features, Emma barely glanced at them before pressing her face into Rex's fur. "It's okay, sweetheart," Maria coaxed. "Just look at the pictures for Detective Chun." But Emma shook her head vigorously, her small body trembling. The photos were too reminiscent of that terrible night, too direct a confrontation with her trauma. Chun was about to pack up the photos when inspiration struck. "Emma," she said gently, "could you show Rex which picture has the Snake Man? Maybe Rex could help us understand." The change was immediate. Emma lifted her head, and began studying the photographs with the careful attention she usually reserved for her picture books. She picked up each photo, examining it closely, talking quietly to Rex as she worked. "This one has brown eyes, Rex, but the snake man had lighter eyes," she murmured, setting aside one photo. "This one's nose is wrong. Too big." Another photo joined the discard pile. When she reached Walsh's mugshot, she froze. "Rex," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "This is him. This is the snake man who made Mama cry." Her small finger pointed directly at Walsh's photo with unwavering certainty. Chun felt a surge of vindication, but she knew the real battle was just beginning. Getting a positive identification from a 3-year-old was one thing. Convincing a judge and jury to accept it was entirely another. District Attorney Patricia Morrison called an emergency meeting the following Monday. Her office was imposing, wall-to-wall law books, diplomas covering one wall, and windows overlooking the courthouse square. Morrison herself was a formidable woman in her 50s, known for her meticulous preparation and courtroom intensity. "You want me to prosecute an armed robbery case based on the testimony of a 3-year-old? Morrison asked, incredulity clear in her voice. "Chun, you know I respect your work, but this is unprecedented. No judge will allow it." "The child is our only witness," Chun argued, "and her identification was positive and immediate. She's remarkably observant for her age." "Observant or not, defense attorneys eat child witnesses for breakfast," Morrison replied, pacing behind her desk. "They'll argue that a 3-year-old doesn't understand the difference between truth and fantasy, that her testimony was coached, that she's too young to understand the concept of an oath." Public Defender Michael Torres proved Morrison's point. When he filed his first motion 2 days later, Torres was a passionate advocate for his clients, known for his creative defense strategies and genuine belief that everyone deserved vigorous representation. His motion to dismiss was thorough and compelling. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case rests entirely on the supposed testimony of a child who hasn't yet developed the cognitive abilities necessary for reliable testimony. At age 3, children are still learning to distinguish between reality and imagination. They are highly susceptible to suggestion and often tell adults what they think those adults want to hear. Moreover, there is no legal precedent for allowing a witness this young to testify in a criminal proceeding." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 15th, exactly 1 month after the robbery. Judge Patricia Williams, a thoughtful jurist with 20 years on the bench, would decide whether Emma's testimony could be admitted at trial. Dr. Amanda Foster, the child psychologist Chun had consulted, spent 3 hours evaluating Emma in a playroom setting at the courthouse. Her report was both encouraging and concerning. Emma Rodriguez demonstrates remarkable recall abilities for specific visual details, and her description of events remains consistent across multiple tellings. However, she exhibits classic signs of trauma-related anxiety and will only discuss the incident when her chosen comfort object, in this case, Detective Chun's police dog Rex, is present. While I believe her testimony is truthful, traditional courtroom settings would likely be too overwhelming for her to function effectively. The night before the hearing, Chun sat in her apartment reviewing Dr. Foster's report while Rex lay beside her, sensing her tension. The case had become more than just another investigation. It represented a test of whether the justice system could adapt to accommodate its most vulnerable witnesses. Her phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Maria Rodriguez, her voice thick with exhaustion and worry. "Detective Chun, Emma had another nightmare. But this time, when she woke up, she asked me something that broke my heart. She wanted to know if the snake man was going to come back because she told Rex about him. She's scared that talking made things worse instead of better." Chun closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Tomorrow's hearing would determine not just whether Danny Walsh faced justice, but whether a brave little girl's trust in the system would be validated or shattered. The Millbrook County Courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity on the morning of November 20th. Media vans lined the street outside the imposing brick building, their satellite dishes reaching toward the overcast sky like mechanical flowers. Seeking sunlight, reporters from 3 states had descended on the small Ohio town, drawn by the unusual story of a toddler witness and her police dog confidant. Judge Patricia Williams had made her decision after the preliminary hearing. Emma Rodriguez would be allowed to testify, but under extraordinary conditions. The courtroom would be limited to essential personnel only. Rex would be permitted to remain with Emma during her testimony, and special accommodations would be made to reduce the child's stress. It was a legal precedent that would be studied for years to come. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Court reporter Nancy Kim checked her equipment twice, knowing that every word spoken today would be scrutinized by legal scholars. The bailiff, Tom Hendricks, a gentle giant with 20 years of experience, had been specially briefed on managing a courtroom with both a small child and a police dog. Defense attorney Michael Torres arrived early, his usual confidence tempered by the unique challenges this case presented. He'd never cross-examined a 3-year-old before, and the ethical implications weighed heavily on his mind. How do you aggressively defend your client without traumatizing a child? How do you question the reliability of a witness who speaks primarily to a dog? Prosecutor Janet Morrison sat at the state's table, reviewing her notes one final time. She'd simplified her usual approach, planning to let Emma's natural honesty speak for itself, rather than trying to coach specific responses. The challenge would be guiding the child through her testimony while allowing her to maintain her unique communication style with Rex. Danny Walsh sat beside Torres, his nervous energy more pronounced than ever. The cobra tattoo on his left arm was partially visible beneath his dress shirt sleeve, and he kept tugging at the fabric to cover it. His foot tapped incessantly under the table, and that distinctive nervous giggle occasionally escaped his lips, drawing stern looks from his attorney. At 9:15 a.m., Detective Chun's patrol car pulled into the courthouse parking lot. In the back seat, Rex sat alert and calm in his service vest, while Emma clutched her stuffed elephant Peanuts with white knuckles. She wore her favorite purple dress, the same one she'd worn to her preschool graduation, along with small white patent leather shoes that made tiny clicking sounds on the courthouse marble. Maria Rodriguez had barely slept the night before, alternating between pride in her daughter's bravery and terror about the potential trauma of facing her attacker. She'd spent the morning braiding Emma's dark hair into neat pigtails tied with purple ribbons, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in an utterly abnormal situation. "Remember, Mia," Maria whispered as they approached the courthouse steps, "you just tell the truth to Rex, just like you always do. Detective Chun and Rex will keep you safe." Emma nodded solemnly, her large brown eyes taking in the imposing building with its towering columns and serious-faced adults bustling about. She'd never seen so many people wearing dark suits and carrying briefcases, and the formal atmosphere made her press closer to her mother's side. The media attention was overwhelming. Camera flashes popped like lightning as they climbed the courthouse steps, and reporters shouted questions that Emma couldn't understand. One particularly aggressive photographer got too close, causing Rex to position himself protectively between Emma and the camera. The gesture wasn't lost on observers. This dog truly was the child's guardian. Inside the courthouse, the family was escorted to a small witness room, where Emma could wait comfortably before her testimony. The room had been specially prepared, with child-friendly furniture, coloring books, and juice boxes. Dr. Foster was present to monitor Emma's emotional state and provide support if needed. "How are you feeling, Emma?" Dr. Foster asked gently, as the little girl settled into a small chair with Rex lying beside her. "My tummy feels funny," Emma admitted, unconsciously echoing the same words she'd used the night of the robbery. "But Rex says it's okay to be scared as long as you're brave, too." She petted Rex's soft ears, drawing comfort from his steady presence. At 10 a.m. sharp, Judge Williams called the court to session. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today for the case of the State of Ohio versus Daniel Walsh. This proceeding involves the testimony of a very young witness under special circumstances that have been approved by this court. The jury selection had been intense, with both attorneys questioning potential jurors extensively about their ability to fairly evaluate testimony from a 3-year-old. The final 12 jurors ranged from a retired teacher who understood child development to a father of 4 who could relate to the protective instincts the case evoked. Torres delivered his opening statement with careful precision, emphasizing the unreliability of child witnesses without directly attacking Emma. "Ladies and gentlemen, while we all sympathize with this family's trauma, we must remember that the burden of proof in criminal cases requires evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution's case rests entirely on the words of a 3-year-old child who was admittedly frightened and traumatized during the alleged incident. Morrison's opening was more emotional. You will hear testimony from a brave little girl who witnessed a terrifying crime. Yes, she is young, but children often see things more clearly than adults because they haven't yet learned to doubt what their eyes tell them. Emma Rodriguez will tell you exactly what she saw that night, and her honesty will leave no doubt about the defendant's guilt." The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived at 11:30 a.m. "The state calls Emma Rodriguez to the stand," Morrison announced. The courtroom fell silent as the bailiff opened the door to the witness room. Emma appeared first, looking impossibly small in the vast courtroom, her purple dress a bright spot of color against the dark wood paneling. Maria walked beside her, providing moral support until she reached the witness area. But Emma stopped dead in her tracks when she saw the crowded courtroom. Despite Judge Williams' efforts to limit attendance, the space still contained the jury, court personnel, attorneys, and a few essential observers. To a 3-year-old, it felt like a stadium full of strangers, all staring at her. Emma's breathing became rapid and shallow. She looked frantically around the room until her eyes found Rex sitting calmly beside Detective Chun in the front row. The moment their eyes met, Emma's face transformed from terror to determination. Breaking free from her mother's gentle grip, Emma ran across the courtroom with her arms outstretched. "Rex!" Her voice echoed off the high ceilings as she launched herself at the German shepherd, who received her with gentle dignity. Wrapping her small arms around Rex's neck, Emma buried her face in his fur and spoke in a voice loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "I told you the Snake Man would be here." Every head in the courtroom turned to follow her pointing finger, which aimed directly at Danny Walsh. The defendant went pale, his nervous giggle escaping in a sound that seemed to confirm Emma's identification more effectively than any formal testimony could have. Judge Williams banged her gavel as murmurs erupted throughout the courtroom. "Order! Order in the court!" But the damage was done. This wasn't testimony that could be stricken from the record or forgotten by the jury. Torres was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, I move for a mistrial. The witnesses made prejudicial statements before being sworn in." Morrison stood as well. "Your Honor, the witness was simply greeting a familiar face and making an observation. She hasn't been questioned yet." Emma, oblivious to the legal chaos she'd created, continued hugging Rex and whispering secrets that only he could hear. In that moment, the entire courtroom understood the unique bond that would define this unprecedented trial. Judge Williams called a 30-minute recess. her chambers quickly becoming a battlefield of legal arguments. Defense attorney Torres paced the small room like a caged tiger, his usually calm demeanor fractured by the unprecedented situation unfolding in his courtroom. "Your Honor, what just happened out there was completely prejudicial," Torres argued, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "The child pointed directly at my client and declared him guilty before she was even sworn in. No jury instruction can undo that kind of damage. I respectfully renew my motion for a mistrial." Prosecutor Morrison sat calmly in her chair, her fingers steepled as she considered her response. "Your Honor, Emma Rodriguez is 3 years old. She wasn't making a legal declaration of guilt. She was simply recognizing someone she'd seen before. Children don't understand the formal protocols of courtrooms. If we're going to allow her testimony at all, we have to accept that it won't follow traditional patterns." Judge Williams rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of making decisions that would likely be studied in law schools for decades. She'd presided over hundreds of cases in her 20-year career, but nothing had prepared her for the unique challenges of a toddler witness who communicated primarily through a police dog. "Mr. Torres, while I understand your concerns, I'm going to deny your motion for mistrial," she decided finally. "However, I will give the jury specific instructions about weighing the testimony of a young witness, and I'll allow you considerable latitude in your cross-examination within appropriate bounds for a child witness." Back in the courtroom, Emma had been moved to a specially arranged witness area. A child-sized chair had been placed next to the traditional witness stand, and Rex lay on a soft blanket beside it, his calm presence serving as an anchor in the storm of legal proceedings. Dr. Foster sat nearby, monitoring Emma's emotional state and ready to intervene if the child became too distressed. Emma swung her small legs from the chair, her patent leather shoes catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall courthouse windows. She clutched Peanuts tightly in one arm, while her free hand rested on Rex's head, her fingers unconsciously stroking his soft fur in a soothing rhythm. "Emma," Judge Williams said in the gentlest voice she could muster, "do you know why you're here today?" Emma looked up at the imposing figure in black robes, then down at Rex. "Rex knows," she said simply. "I told him about the scary man, and now we have to tell everyone else so he can't scare any more mommies." The judge's heart clenched at the child's innocent understanding of justice. "Emma, do you promise to tell the truth today, just like you told Rex?" "Yes," Emma nodded solemnly. "Rex says telling the truth is always right, even when it's scary." Morrison approached the witness area slowly, her usual commanding courtroom presence softened for this unique witness. She'd spent hours preparing for this moment, consulting with child psychologists and veteran prosecutors who'd handled cases involving young victims. "Emma, can you tell us about the night when the scary man came to your mommy's store?" Emma's grip on Peanuts tightened, and she leaned closer to Rex. For a long moment, the courtroom held its breath, wondering if the child would retreat into the silence that had followed her trauma. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Emma began to speak, not to Morrison, not to the jury, but to Rex. "Remember, Rex? I was sleeping in Mama's workplace, and I heard the scary voice. The man was tall, taller than Mama, but not as tall as the big white boxes where the milk lives." Her small hand gestured vaguely, trying to convey the height comparison she'd shared with Rex weeks earlier. Morrison pulled out photographs of the store interior, showing them to Emma. "Can you show Rex which boxes you mean?" Emma studied the pictures carefully, her 3-year-old attention span remarkably focused when Rex was involved. She pointed to the industrial refrigeration units, those ones the man's head came up to. "Here." She indicated a spot about 6 inches below the top of the units. Torres watched from the defense table, his legal mind calculating the implications. If the refrigeration units were 7 feet tall, Emma was describing someone approximately 6 feet 2 inches, exactly Danny Walsh's height. What else do you remember about the scary man, Emma? Morrison continued, following Dr. Foster's advice to let Emma control the pace of her revelations. Emma's voice grew even quieter as she pressed her face into Rex's neck. He had the pretty snake, but it was mean pretty. Not nice pretty like Rex's fur. She pulled back slightly to look at Rex's face. The snake had green eyes that looked at me, and it went round and round his arm like this. To the amazement of everyone in the courtroom, Emma began tracing spiral patterns on Rex's foreleg, demonstrating the coiled pattern of the cobra tattoo with startling accuracy. The jury leaned forward, captivated by this unusual form of testimony. The snake's head was right here, Emma continued, touching a spot on Rex's leg that corresponded exactly to where Walsh's tattoo was positioned. And it had white teeth, really sharp ones. Morrison felt a surge of excitement. These details were incredibly specific, details that hadn't been released to the media, and that only someone who'd seen the tattoo up close could know. But then Emma's testimony took an unexpected turn that sent chills through the courtroom. "Rex," she whispered, her voice trembling. The scary man made that sound again. The not happy laugh, just like that night. Everyone turned to look at the defense table, where Danny Walsh sat frozen, his face pale with shock. His nervous giggle had been bubbling up periodically throughout Emma's testimony, an unconscious response to stress that he couldn't control. Torres placed a firm hand on his client's arm, but the damage was done. The jury had heard both Emma's description of the not happy laugh and Walsh's involuntary demonstration of it. "And he smelled funny too," Emma continued, warming to her story as Rex's steady presence gave her confidence. "Like the spray Mama uses to make our bathroom smell nice, but too much of it. And something else that made my nose hurt." Morrison nodded encouragingly. "Can you tell Rex what the scary man did at the store?" Emma's demeanor shifted, becoming more somber as she relived the traumatic memory. "He made Mama open the money box and took all the papers with presidents on them. Mama was crying, but she tried to be quiet so I wouldn't be scared. But I was already scared because the snake man's eyes were mean." The courtroom was utterly silent except for the soft scratching of the court reporter's fingers on her stenotype machine and the occasional rustle of papers. Even the usually restless spectators sat motionless, captivated by this child's simple but devastating testimony. Torres knew his cross-examination would be the most delicate of his career. How do you challenge a 3-year-old's testimony without appearing to attack a traumatized child? How do you raise questions about reliability and memory without destroying your own credibility with the jury? But as he looked at Emma, still whispering secrets to Rex, while the adults around her grappled with the weight of her words, Torres realized that traditional legal strategies might be useless here. This wasn't just testimony. It was a conversation between a frightened child and her 4-legged therapist, and the jury was witnessing something unprecedented in American jurisprudence. The question now was whether justice could be served through such an unconventional path, and whether a 3-year-old's trust in a police dog could be enough to convict a dangerous criminal. The afternoon sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor, as Prosecutor Morrison approached the most crucial moment of her career. Emma had been testifying for nearly an hour, her small voice growing stronger with each question, as Rex's presence provided the security she needed to relive that terrifying night. "Emma," Morrison said gently, kneeling down to the child's eye level, "I need to ask you a very important question. Can you look around this room and tell Rex if you see the scary man who came to your mommy's store?" The courtroom held its collective breath. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The formal identification that would either convict or acquit Danny Walsh. Emma's dark eyes swept the room slowly, taking in the faces of jurors, court personnel, and observers, with the careful attention that had made her such a valuable witness. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her small hand continued stroking Rex's fur in that unconscious rhythm that had become her source of comfort. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable, the weight of anticipation pressing down on everyone present. Then Emma leaned down until her face was level with Rex's intelligent brown eyes, and she spoke in a voice that somehow managed to be both whisper quiet and crystal clear in the acoustically perfect courtroom. "Rex," she said, with a matter-of-fact tone that only children could achieve when stating obvious truths. "Remember I told you about the man with the snake who made Mama cry? He's sitting right over there, in the blue shirt." Emma's small finger pointed with unwavering certainty toward the defense table, where Danny Walsh sat frozen in his court-appointed navy suit. The gesture was so natural, so unforced, that it carried more weight than any dramatic courtroom pointing could have achieved. But Emma wasn't finished. As if sensing that the adults needed more clarity, she continued her conversation with Rex, oblivious to the stunned silence her words had created. "See, Rex? He's trying to hide the snake under his sleeve, but I can still see part of it. And listen, he's making that scared laugh again, just like he did when he took Mama's money." Her observation was accompanied by Walsh's involuntary, nervous giggle, which seemed to echo through the courtroom like an admission of guilt. Defense attorney Torres felt his stomach drop as he watched his client's composure crumble. Walsh was tugging frantically at his sleeve, trying to cover the visible portion of his cobra tattoo, and that damning giggle kept escaping his lips despite Torres's earlier warnings to remain silent and composed. Emma tilted her head, studying Walsh with the innocent curiosity of a child examining an interesting insect. "He looks different now, Rex. His hair is shorter, and he smells like soap instead of that yucky spray. But it's definitely him. I remember his mean eyes and the way he stands with one shoulder higher than the other." Morrison felt chills run down her spine. Emma's observation about Walsh's uneven shoulder stance was something she hadn't mentioned before, and looking at the defendant now, it was clearly visible. Walsh indeed stood and sat with his left shoulder slightly elevated, a detail that only someone who had observed him carefully would notice. Judge Williams leaned forward slightly, captivated despite herself by this unprecedented testimony. In 20 years on the bench, she'd never witnessed anything like this conversation between a traumatized child and a police dog that somehow managed to be more compelling than traditional witness testimony. Emma's voice grew softer as she continued sharing her memories with Rex, but her words carried clearly in the silent courtroom. "I was so scared that night, Rex, but Mama was braver than me. She gave him all the money, even though she was crying, because she wanted to keep me safe." The emotional weight of her words affected everyone present. Juror number 7, a mother of 2 young children, wiped tears from her eyes. Even the court reporter, normally stoic in her professional duties, felt her throat tighten as she transcribed the child's simple but devastating testimony. "And you know what else, Rex?" Emma continued, her voice taking on the conspiratorial tone children used when sharing important secrets. "After he took the money, he looked around like he was making sure nobody saw him. But I saw him. I saw everything from my hiding spot behind the door." Torres knew he had to attempt a cross-examination, but how do you challenge a 3-year-old without appearing to bully a child? How do you question the reliability of testimony delivered in the form of a conversation with a dog? He'd consulted with colleagues, studied precedents, and prepared extensively, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of facing Emma's innocent honesty. "Emma," Torres said, approaching as gently as possible, "sometimes when we're scared, our minds can play tricks on us. Are you sure you remember everything exactly, right?" Emma looked up at him with those large, serious eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. Instead of answering Torres directly, she turned back to Rex. Rex, the man is trying to say I'm wrong about what I saw. But you believe me, don't you? You know, I always tell you the truth. Rex's gentle huff seemed to confirm her statement, and Emma nodded with satisfaction. Torres tried a different approach. Emma, it was very dark that night. Could you really see everything clearly? Again, Emma addressed her answer to Rex rather than the attorney. Tell him, Rex. Tell him about the lights in Mama's store. They're very bright, brighter than our lights at home. And the scary man was standing right under the biggest light, so I could see his snake perfectly. The cross-examination continued for another 20 minutes, but Torres found himself in the impossible position of arguing with a child who refused to engage with him directly, choosing instead to validate her testimony through her canine confidant. Every question he asked was answered through Rex, and each answer seemed to strengthen rather than weaken Emma's credibility. Finally, Torres made the difficult decision to end his cross-examination. Further questioning was only making his client look worse, and the jury was clearly sympathetic to this brave little girl who had found her voice through her bond with a police dog. No further questions, Your Honor, Torres said, returning to his seat with the heavy knowledge that his client's fate now rested in the hands of 12 jurors who had just witnessed the most unusual testimony in legal history. As Emma prepared to step down from the witness area, she leaned over and whispered one final secret to Rex, her words barely audible, but somehow carrying to every corner of the courtroom. We did good, didn't we, Rex? Now the scary man can't hurt any more mommies. The simplicity and sincerity of her statement hung in the air as Emma hugged Rex one final time before rejoining her mother. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented, not just in legal terms, but in human terms. A traumatized child had found her courage through the loyalty of a police dog, and together they had delivered testimony that would change both the outcome of this trial and the future of the American justice system. The jury deliberation room felt electric with tension as 12 citizens grappled with a case unlike any in American legal history. Foreman Robert Chun, a retired high school principal with 30 years of experience reading children's faces, looked around the table at his fellow jurors. The emotional weight of Emma's testimony hung heavy in the air, but they all understood the gravity of their decision. I've never seen anything like that in my life, whispered juror number 4, Margaret Sullivan, a grandmother of 6. That little girl, the way she talked to that dog, it was like watching pure truth unfold. But can we convict based on a 3-year-old's testimony? Questioned juror number 9, David Park, an accountant who prided himself on methodical analysis. I mean, she never even looked at the defense attorney during cross-examination. She only talked to the dog. That's exactly what made it so convincing, countered juror number 2, Linda Martinez, a social worker who had extensive experience with traumatized children. She wasn't performing for us. She was simply telling her friend Rex what she remembered. There was no coaching, no rehearsed responses, just honest memory. The deliberation continued for exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. When they emerged, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all charges. Judge Williams received the verdict with a mixture of relief and trepidation, knowing that this decision would be appealed and scrutinized by courts across the nation. As she called the court back to session, the media circus outside had grown to include legal experts from major networks, all waiting to witness the conclusion of this landmark case. Emma wasn't present for the verdict reading. Dr. Foster had recommended against exposing her to additional courtroom stress. Instead, she was at home with Maria, playing with her coloring books and asking repeatedly when she would see Rex again. She had no understanding of the legal hurricane her testimony had created, or the precedent her courage had established. When the guilty verdict was read aloud, Danny Walsh's face crumpled. His nervous giggle finally ceased, replaced by the stark silence of a man facing the consequences of his actions. His cobra tattoo seemed to mock him now, the permanent reminder of the night that had brought him down through the eyes of a 3-year-old witness. Judge Williams scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, giving her time to research appropriate punishment for a case that had redefined the boundaries of witness testimony. Legal scholars across the country weighed in on the precedent, with some hailing it as a breakthrough for victim rights and others warning about the reliability of child witnesses. The sentencing hearing drew even more media attention than the Ocean trial itself. Emma was again absent, but Detective Chun and Rex were present in the gallery, their partnership having become the symbol of innovative law enforcement approaches. Rex wore his service vest proudly, seemingly aware of his role in this historic case. "Mr. Walsh," Judge Williams began, her voice carrying the weight of 20 years of judicial experience, "you have been found guilty of armed robbery, a crime that terrorized a hard-working mother and traumatized her innocent child. While your victim was only 3 years old, her courage in testifying against you has shown a bravery that adults twice your age struggle to find." She paused, looking directly at Walsh, who sat slumped in his chair, all traces of his former arrogance gone. "The court sentences you to 8 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution to Maria Rodriguez in the amount of $340 plus court costs." As Walsh was led away in handcuffs, his cobra tattoo visible one final time beneath his orange jumpsuit sleeve, Detective Chun felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served through the most unlikely partnership. A traumatized 3-year-old and a German shepherd who understood that sometimes the most important police work involved simply listening. 6 months later, Millbrook had returned to its quiet rhythm, but the Rodriguez family's life had changed dramatically. The case had generated a victims' fund that ensured Emma's college education would be fully paid for, and Maria had been promoted to day manager at an expanded Manny's Corner market, allowing her to spend evenings at home with her daughter. Emma had begun preschool and was thriving, her natural intelligence and observational skills now channeled into learning letters and numbers, instead of identifying criminals. The nightmares had faded, replaced by dreams of becoming a veterinarian so she could help animals like Rex. The courthouse had officially designated Rex as Ohio's first certified courthouse therapy dog, and his success with Emma had led to a new protocol for interviewing child witnesses across the state. Detective Chun had been promoted to sergeant and was traveling to other jurisdictions, training officers in trauma-informed interview techniques. On a crisp spring morning, exactly 6 months after the trial, a special ceremony was held in Millbrooks Town Square. Mayor Patricia Hendricks had proclaimed it Emma and Rex Day, celebrating their courage and the national attention their case had brought to innovative victim advocacy. Emma arrived wearing a new purple dress, this one purchased for the celebration rather than inherited from church clothes. She carried a handmade medal crafted in her preschool class, a gold-painted cardboard circle that read, "World's Best Listener," in her careful 4-year-old handwriting. When Rex appeared with Detective Chun, Emma's face lit up with pure joy. She ran to him with the same enthusiasm she'd shown in the courtroom. But now there was no fear, no trauma, just the happiness of a child reunited with her hero. "Rex," she called, throwing her arms around his neck. "I missed you so much. I have so many things to tell you." As the crowd watched, Emma hung the medal around Rex's neck and whispered in his ear, "We're famous, aren't we, Rex? Mama says we helped make sure bad people can't hurt kids anymore." Rex's gentle tail wag seemed to acknowledge not just her words, but the remarkable journey they'd shared together. Their unlikely partnership had indeed changed everything, not just for their small Ohio town, but for the entire American justice system. Detective Chun watched proudly as Emma presented Rex with his medal, knowing that this moment represented more than just a local celebration. It was validation that justice could be found in the most unexpected places, that courage came in all sizes, and that sometimes the most powerful testimony came from the most innocent voices. The case of Emma. Rodriguez and Rex had proven that the truth, when spoken with pure honesty and unwavering courage, could overcome any legal obstacle. Their story would be taught in law schools for generations. A reminder that the pursuit of justice sometimes required innovation, compassion, and the willingness to listen to voices that others might dismiss. As the ceremony concluded and Emma skipped away hand in hand with her mother, Rex by her side, she turned back one final time to wave at the crowd. In that gesture was the confidence of a child who had faced her worst fear and emerged victorious, protected by the unwavering loyalty of a four-legged friend who had taught her that telling the truth was always worth the courage it required.